Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Lords of the Screen podcast. We're a film podcast, an entertainment podcast. And I am joined today by Kevin Rice. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how you doing?
And my wife. Kate Foux. Hey, Kate.
Hey, hi, guys. Thanks for having me again.
Always good to have you on, Kate.
Yeah, check out a couple of Kentucky seasonal episodes. Kate's been on the show a couple times. Very knowledgeable, my beautiful wife. But anyway, today we're going to talk about In the Heights and Lin-Manuel Miranda kind of taking the musical world by storm right now. Very popular dude. Mm-hmm. So I thought we would start with that, actually. He's just become this insanely popular sensation in a genre that I would say with young people was not doing very well.
Not doing very well at all. Musicals, back in the 50s and 60s, they were the dominant cinema, I think, experience. They were just ubiquitous. They were everywhere. There were probably 50 musicals made every year, and some of the best movies of all time. I mean, you're talking about West Side Story, My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, Wizard of Oz, just classic movies that were all over the place. And then around the 70s or 80s, they just started dropping out, and they just kind of left the mainstream and became more of a curiosity. And it's been kind of that way for a long time, until like maybe the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, the movie musical has started making a comeback, which is great because I love the genre.
No, I'm actually not a huge fan of the genre, but Kate, obviously, we've watched a lot of musicals together. You're a huge fan, right?
I'm a huge fan, and I think if you look at kind of generation-wise, the people who are young adults now, the people who are adults now, a lot of us were raised on Disney movies, right?
Yeah, right.
And what Disney does really well is make musical movies. Mm-hmm. And it just became normal. And I think that generationally, you see it kind of coming back. And I can't even tell you what year, I'd have to glance, but like starting at when we made Rent into a movie, then we did Mamma Mia, and you guys have already talked about Cats, but we're starting to bring more stage productions back to film, and I think it's making more people aware of what's out there.
I would go a little earlier than the movie version of Rent. Actually, I think Chicago was 2002.
Oh, true.
Yeah, 2002. You're right.
And that one, it dominated the box office and the award season. And first of all, it's just a damn good movie, very well made. And so I think that one is really kind of the one that's maybe responsible for reminding people that, oh yeah, this musical thing is actually kind of great. And is really creative and just tells a story in a really interesting way. I find it interesting though, because I talk to a lot of people like our co-host Nick, who can't be with us tonight, but he's here with us in spirit, grumbling the entire time because he hates musicals. He's not a fan of the musical. But I really find it interesting that I find a lot of people who say they don't like musicals will then say, oh, but I love The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and The Little Mermaid. But dude, those are musicals. So exactly. If you like those,
100% musicals, and a lot of them started as or later became stage productions.
Yeah.
In fact, Kevin and I have gone to see The Lion King live on stage. So yeah, I don't know where that disconnect comes in for people, because we are definitely talking about musicals.
Do you think that it's just the fact that those are animated Disney movies and people just equate Disney with happiness and family and not so much a musical genre?
Well, and I think that because they're animated, it overcomes that barrier that a lot of people have trying to watch live action musicals, which is, okay, why are we singing now? Why can't you just be talking? Where an animated movie, it already has that fantasy element, that otherworldness element to it, in being an animation, that I think it just is a little easier to swallow. Because a musical, I mean, you have to just go into it knowing we're telling this story through song and dance. And a lot of people have trouble getting over that hurdle, I think.
I think I definitely do. As someone who's not the biggest musical fan, now I've grown to love them more, especially as I get older. But I remember as a young guy kind of coming into the musical genre, and like one of the first musicals I actually saw was Newsies, funnily enough. For some reason, they showed it in high school. I actually enjoy it nowadays, but the cheesiness of it. But I remember watching these musicals and Newsies in particular and being like, maybe they could just tell this story with lines and speaking like how they do in any other movie. Like, why is this kid jumping on the train and, like, you know, throwing his hat and just singing at the top of his lungs? Like, I just want to hear the story, you know?
That,
and like
that kid being a very young Christian Bale, by the way.
exactly, another reason I like the movie. But if you know, I think that's what gets a lot of people on this hang up of musicals are annoying or bad. Like, you have these cool premises, and then you've got to sit through at least 10 songs. I mean, like, there's a whole soundtrack to these things, you know?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to just knowing what it is as you go in. It's just a different medium. It's just a different way to tell a story. You know, you look at an anime, has its own ticks and genre cliches. So does a musical. So does an action film. So does a martial arts movie. It's just a genre and a mode of storytelling that's a little different. And for me, as a lifelong musician and lover of, you know, the arts and theater, to me it's the kind of the perfect form of storytelling, because it encapsulates everything that I love, from good scripting, good writing, good acting, to good music and dance. To me, it's just kind of the ultimate celebration of creativity, which is why I love them.
I think we convey more emotion in song too. I think that's why we see people love music so much. I mean, if people loved music just for the sound, we'd hear more people listening to orchestral music, but we don't. People are inspired by the lyrics and the emotion and the feel. I'm not arguing that orchestral music doesn't have all those things, but I think people like the lyrics. Okay. People like the lyrics and they like what they convey. And it's so surprising that somebody who will listen to the radio for hours and hours and then we'll get to a musical and be like, no, I hate it. Right. I hate the music. I'm like, no, this is the emotion. And not to call anyone out here, but someone who says they didn't used to love musicals has been known to cry at a couple. Right. So I'm just saying, perhaps in the Heights, there were perhaps tears during In the Heights.
Sure. Yeah.
Heaven, folks. So I think that there's a lot in it that really conveys more than you would with just spoken word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, before we move on, I'm curious, and yes, we will talk about me crying and In the Heights in just a second. There's a beautiful scene in that, but really I just have a question for you guys that I thought would be interesting, because I was rattling my brain, because I was a theater kid. I did a lot of theater. I was even in some musicals, despite not being able to sing very well. I kind of sung my way through a lot of them. But I had never seen like a professionally done musical until Kate took me to see Hamilton. And in what, 2018, Kate, or 2019? I'm not sure when.
It was either late 18 or early 19.
Yeah, and I mean that's pretty recent. You know, I had never seen one before. I was a grown man before I saw an actual theater musical production, like a live one. And I was just wondering, like, what was the first one that you guys went to, and did you go out of your way to see it? I'll start with you, Kate.
My first big one. So I grew up in the Chicago area, which meant that I had the options of like more local theater and then bigger name theater. But my first like big stage show was Ragtime. Okay. And I saw it because I want to say my 6th grade or 7th grade class went as a field trip. And I read that later, like in high school, and there was some very adult content that I don't think I realized when I was, you know, like 11 or 12 seeing it. I was like, why did they take us to see this? But it was great and I loved it. And so did a lot of my classmates.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you, Kev?
I think the earliest time that I can remember going to a theater musical was probably a local production, because I do not live in Chicago. I live in Beaumont, Texas. And so it's very rare that we get, you know, touring theater troupes.
Right.
They do. I mean, they do come in, and when they do, they're great. But it's pretty rare. We have to drive to Houston for that stuff. But the earliest one I can remember seeing was a production of The Music Man, which was this Meredith Willson play. It was just fantastic. And there was a wonderful movie made out of it as well. But I can just remember being on the stage, or being sitting in the theater, watching these people on the stage. And I was probably 8 or 9. And just being blown away by how transportive it was. You know, that here's this really your perspective is just limited to this one little box, really. But even still, I was transported to River City, Iowa, right there in the theater. And it was just a wonderful performance. But I all my life, I've been going to, you know, as much live theater as I can, including I've even performed in some in the orchestra. Probably my favorite one that I've ever seen live was Les Miserables.
Oh, yes.
I saw that in Houston. And it was just, man, just that movie is such a fucking travesty because
True.
because the stage play is just so wonderful. And
one musical soundtrack that I've heard dozens of times through my theater friends or just whoever is Wicked.
Yeah.
And so, last year, or was it the year before last? But anyway, I got Kate and I to see tickets to Wicked. But the pandemic, of course, absolutely destroyed that. And so now we have a young baby, and so we're like, well, I guess we're just never going to get to see Wicked. These tickets keep getting moved back and back, but I am very, very excited to go and see it at some point in the future. But
that's a really good one. I think you'll like it a lot.
Yeah, and it will actually be my third time seeing
wow.
it on stage. And the funny part of this is, so for my birthday in 2020, which was January, so early in the year before we got all mixed up in COVID, Kevin bought me these tickets to Wicked. And I was so excited. And I was like, Kevin, I've been watching for Wicked. I swear it is not coming this fall. And the tickets were for August. And he's like, no, it's great. And I actually pulled them up and looked at him. And I was like, just so you know, Kevin, it's August 2021. Like, we're seeing Wicked in August 2021. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then the pandemic happened. And I was like, this was a great choice. We've got a year and a half to get back to the theater. But like Kevin said, we have a newborn. And so I'm not sure we'll be getting back to the theater in August. But I'm excited that other people are getting back to the theater, that Broadway is opening back up.
Exactly.
I was involved in high schools in musical, and then had a lot of friends who were involved in the musicals, but a lot of people I know, either from high school or college, are actually professionally in the theater business.
Nice.
And this has been a horrible time for them, just absolutely horrible. And so I'm so happy, both for theater goers and for people who this is their livelihood, that we're getting back to bringing musicals to the stage. I am so excited to see that happen.
It's just such a great, vibrant art form that I would hate to see die.
Yeah.
I completely share your feelings about that. I'm really glad that it's back on its feet.
But since it hasn't been, I am glad we get things like In the Heights, or when Disney released Hamilton last summer in the middle of the pandemic when I couldn't go see live shows. It was great.
So let's talk about that bit of Kevin. Let's talk about that a bit. Hamilton as your first live, musical theater experience. It's kind of a pretty big one to start with.
It's a huge one. It absolutely blew me away. And, going into it, I'm always skeptical of most things. And I was definitely skeptical of this because you hear all the buzz, and you're like, oh, Hamilton, it's the best musical ever. Everyone's going to see it. It's selling all these tickets. And, I was like, yeah. I'm sure it's like some fine musical, just like all the other musicals, whatever. I'll go check it out. I know Kate's a big fan, and I knew that it meant a lot to her. And I was like, sure, I'll go watch it with you. That's no problem. I'll probably enjoy myself. Absolutely blown away, man. It was kind of and I know that it's just a straightforward musical, but it was kind of genre bending to me. Like, I had never experienced I had never experienced a musical in that way and in this form. So, and let's talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda and what he's kind of done and what he's bringing, because Hamilton did just sell an absolute shit ton of tickets, right? I mean,
is it? I have to look this up, but I'm not sure if it's the most successful. It's probably not the most successful of all time, but it's got to be up there, because you still hear stories about, oh, Hamilton's sold out for the next 5 years, and tickets, by the way, are $1,800,
right?
And it's just insane, absolute insanity. But Lin-Manuel, this young Puerto Rican, I think he was a first generation American from Puerto Rican. His parents are Puerto Rican. Just jumps on the scene with In the Heights, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But what he brought to the genre, to musical theater, absolutely revolutionized it in a way that is generational. That only happens every once in a while. You could probably argue that Andrew Lloyd Webber was the last one who made such a generational change. To musical theater, to the art form. And what Miranda did was bring in those, popular mainstream styles of music that were not seen as allowed, I guess, in musical theater. But things like hip hop and reggaeton and all these Latin styles, the music of the people, really, of normal people, and just completely exploded, everybody's minds with that. In the Heights was a huge hit. It was his first musical that he wrote, and it won all the Tonys, including best musical, best musical, best score, all that stuff.
I did want to talk about that real quick because I was funny because I knew that In the Heights was coming out, but I'm not as well versed on these things as you guys are. I know Kate, you knew this, and obviously Kevin, you knew this, but I actually had no idea it was his first like musical.
Yeah.
And so when I was watching it, I was like, man, this is obviously like derivative of Hamilton. Like it's very much like Hamilton. Like I didn't know this was kind of like the precursor of his work, but the precursor of Hamilton. And I was like, huh. Maybe this guy doesn't have it, but I will say, knowing now that this came before and he kind of built off of this to create Hamilton, it makes a lot more sense.
And it's actually really interesting because if you listen to them back to back, you can hear some seeds of stuff that he would go on to put in Hamilton. You can hear them musically kind of seated in the Heights with some of the rhythms, some of the melodies. You can kind of they're like they're nascent forms that get fully fleshed out for Hamilton. It's really kind of interesting. And a lot of and to be honest, a lot of composers are like that, to where you can listen to some of their work and you can definitely, without even knowing who it is, it's like, oh, okay, that's a Stephen Sondheim song because it sounds like every other Stephen Sondheim song. So that's not really a negative to say that the two are alike. It's just it's a signature style, I guess.
Right.
Well, Kevin Rice, as somebody else who's a big musical fan, when you were watching In the Heights, I personally, so I heard the references that we kind of hear later in Hamilton, but I multiple times was like, wow, like he was definitely like a Larson fan. Like, so I listened to it and I was like, wow, this is really like reverential to Rent. There are some things going on in here. And then afterwards, I either remembered or looked up, or I was like, oh man, I forgot that Lin-Manuel Miranda is putting out Tick, Tick, Boom, which was a Larson production that really didn't get its time in the sun.
Right.
And then for those of you who don't know, kind of the tragedy of Rent is that its creator, I believe he died the night before opening.
It was preview. It was the first night of previews.
Yeah. So like this show is about to come out with an amazing cast. Like Idina Menzel was in the original cast. Like
Idina Menzel, Taye Diggs,
Adam
Pascal, Anthony Rapp.
Anthony Rappert. I mean, just
but basically everybody in the movie.
Basically everybody in the movie almost. But the thing is that it was off Broadway. It was not set to be this huge hit, and they, he died, and they looked at each other and they said, we will go on. Like his work deserves to be seen, and now look at it. But when I was watching In the Heights, I kind of saw that influence. And then to know that like Lin-Manuel Miranda has come so far and he has all this fame, and he's going to make sure that Jonathan Larson's earlier work, Tick, Tick, Boom, is going to be seen. And that actually comes out later this year, starring Andrew Garfield, who I didn't know could sing. I've seen the previews and I was like, holy cow, you sing.
That's actually going to be Miranda's directorial film debut as well.
Yes. And that comes out this fall. I don't think they have a direct release date yet, but like what a year for Lin-Manuel Miranda, between like the end of, like, not the end of, but we're seeing still some of the Hamilton hype. We've got Tick, Tick, Boom coming out later this year. We just had In the Heights out. We've got Encanto coming out later this year, which he's doing all the music for as a new Disney film. So following his success with Moana, which he did all of the music for, now he's got Encanto coming out, which is a Latinx story. So I just think this is such an amazing time for him.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But going back to the, kind of the musical references, is yes, there's a lot of Jonathan Larson in there. There's also a lot of Sondheim and I'm kicking myself because it's my favorite musical, West Side Story, Leonard Bernstein. A lot of references to that, not only in the music, but in the staging as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the West Side Story, Kevin, because I know you've never seen it, The remake's coming out this year, so you will watch that at least.
I'll have to, yeah.
Is a Romeo and Juliet adaptation set in Lincoln Square, which is the kind of upper midtown. I don't quite know Manhattan geography very well, but it's in Manhattan in the 50s, and it's a story of racial strife. So Romeo and Juliet, instead of the Montagues and the Capulets, it's the white gang and the Latino gang. And so there's this wonderful scene where the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet is transposed onto the fire escapes on the sides of the New York building. So that number that happens in the Heights at the end where they're on the fire escape dancing, that's just kind of, I think, a direct reference to that West Side Story a bit as well.
That's hilarious. I thought that was a direct reference to Rent.
Really? Okay. Well, maybe. Yeah. Maybe
so Rent also has all these like neighborhood things, so not necessarily like a little bit one side versus the other, especially with the like idea of gentrification, which we see play out in the Heights as well. But there are some great like Roger and Mimi scenes that take place on a fire escape.
It's true.
And the fire escape is both the opening and I think the closing of the show. And so when that scene came on, I looked at Kevin, I was like, oh man, this is so Rent. But I'm sure that Rent also got influences from, like we go back through the years of musicals, and I don't think we can separate any of them really. Like there's no one out there who's made a musical without seeing another musical, like some of that reference plays through.
And speaking of that, I think you guys bring up a good point. Whenever, Kevin says West Side Story, Kate says Rent, it's obvious that Lin-Manuel is so well versed in this genre. He's just absolutely head over heels into this genre. He's the Hollywood man right now for this. I mean, Kate, you brought up Encanto, you brought up Moana. He's working with the absolute biggest juggernaut, Disney.
Yeah.
And he got on with Disney, and now it seems like he's headlining so many of their musical films, and a lot of the music from the, Disney is pretty much the biggest music in the world right now. I mean, I guess people could argue it's not, but anything Disney makes goes worldwide. I mean, people in Japan still sing Frozen. I mean, it's everywhere. And so, it's like this guy has skyrocketed out of control in this one genre, a genre that I guess you could argue, especially for young people, was kind of dying, like we said earlier. So I think that right now he is the go-to guy. And I'm kind of interested if anyone is going to come along, maybe like a protege of his, or if anyone is going to be able to match him, or if Lin-Manuel kind of died down or took a break, would musicals die down and take a break?
Well, I don't think so. I think the cat's out of the bag now. Now that the mainstream audiences have kind of remembered that, oh yeah, we like this stuff, because even before Hamilton, was on Disney Plus last year, Mamma Mia was a huge commercial success.
Right.
The high school, this is kind of silly, but the high school musicals, live musicals are back on network TV every year. The ABC and Fox are putting on live musical productions every year. And that stuff was dead for decades. But now it's really come back in the mainstream in such a great way. Even I think Miranda is absolutely leading the charge. But then there's people like Pasek and Paul, which is a songwriting duo, and they did The Greatest Showman. They did all the music for The Greatest Showman. Huge financial juggernaut. I'm not going to argue the quality of the movie. I think it's kind of crap, but it sold a lot of money, and the soundtrack was great. The music is phenomenal. And they have another movie this year based on their play, Dear Evan Hansen. That's coming out later this year as well.
And then, like, when you talk about some of that, like that Disney fame, when you look at the history of Disney, you go back to originally the Sherman Brothers, who were the ones writing our music for Mary Poppins and the original classics. And then you go through Howard Ashman and his work on Aladdin, Little Mermaid. I mean, just some beautiful music. And so I think Disney has gone through different phases of musical influences. And I really think if you look, there was a Disney lull in, I would say, early 2000s. And I really think a lot of that came from the music, them not having a great person doing the music.
Well, I think they kind of didn't they stop musicals altogether for a while. Like I know
for a little bit,
that way.
Yeah, like I want to say after Hercules and Mulan, Like Emperor's New Groove was not a musical. Tarzan was barely not a musical. I mean, yeah, the Phil Collins at the soundtrack, but it wasn't a traditional.
Atlantis, not a musical.
Yeah, I know what Home on the Range. Did anybody even watch that movie?
Well, and then we got a lot of Pixar movies doing good for a
Right.
while, as opposed to the exclusive Disney line.
Yeah, but then they came back with Frozen, or I guess Tangled was first. Tangled was kind of their return to the Disney musical, and then of course Frozen just took over the planet a couple years after.
It did, but let me tell you, when you listen to Frozen and Moana back to back, Frozen has this power of having Idina Menzel and her beautiful singing voice, but the composition of the music is not at the same level. I mean, honestly, there's so many people, and mostly kids, who are just obsessed with the Frozen music. But if you ask adults, they're going to tell you Moana, because the composition of the music is beautiful. Do they have the same powerhouse singers behind it? Not exactly. You've got Chris Jackson, who was in both Hamilton and he was in the Heights. We see him with a singing role, and Lin-Manuel Miranda himself with a singing role in Moana, but our leads are not quite as strong. But the composition is beautiful, and I really think that that's why they continue to move in this direction. And then the music in Coco, which is not Lin-Manuel Miranda, but still beautiful. I think they've really gotten back to putting that artistry in their works.
So I think my biggest problem with the music in Frozen, and I have a lot of problems with that movie. I'm pretty lukewarm on Frozen in general. But I think a big part of it is because the music to me sounds just a complete ripoff of Wicked. Like Let It Go is just defying gravity. And I don't think it's only because Idina Menzel sings both songs. Like just compositionally, they sound very, very similar. And so Frozen just really kind of just felt like a big old ripoff to me. But now of course, all the kids who had not seen Wicked yet, because the movie is not out. It will be, I think, in a couple of years. But hadn't seen this, so this was kind of their first experience to it, and so they of course just latched onto it. Where meanwhile, all of us old theater junkies were, this is it's kind of derivative, bro. So
kind of derivative, and the voices were not as strong. Like this, you've got Idina Menzel, but then you put her next to, why am I blanking? Kristen Bell, who is a okay singer, right?
Yeah. She's fine. She's good. Not great.
But ask her to hold her own with Idina Menzel. It's not fair. It's just not fair. I'm sorry, Kristen Bell. Like, you do fine, but like that's a rough fit. And then you've got why can't I think of his name?
Jonathan Groff.
Yes.
Yeah, and they don't.
I love. Well, they do later, but
not in the first movie. In the first movie, he doesn't have a song.
His song in the second movie is great, but I'm going to stop you guys there because I would love to listen to you guys talking about musicals all day. That's actually why I brought Kate on, because I know she's so passionate. But I want to go back to In the Heights, because both of you guys just waxed poetical about musicals and how good they're doing. But the dark side of this is In the Heights did not do that well at the box office, did it not? Or not as well as they anticipated?
It absolutely flopped. It absolutely flopped.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that begs the question, despite, we just talked him up and talked about how great he is, are musicals still not a big draw to audiences?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think it still has that struggle of overcoming, the stigma of this being just a weird thing. Why are people singing and dancing? Gross, and I don't think mainstream audiences are quite fully back to embracing it. Or maybe it was the pandemic. Maybe it's that people aren't ready to get back out in the theaters yet. I don't know, but not necessarily, because The Quiet Place just smashed the box office. Same like Godzilla and King Kong as well, just absolutely broke records for the pandemic.
A lot of these, I mean, we've talked about it before, but a lot of these cheaply made horror films, usually, a lot of them do really well, and there's always a demand for horror films. And Quiet Place Part 1 kind of was a big success in its own genre, and now this one's kind of blown up. But I mean, it's interesting to me, and I'm also wondering if maybe a little bit of In the Heights failure is due to the fact that it's on HBO Max, and everyone that is a huge musical fan can just turn on HBO Max and check it out.
I mean, that very well may be the case. I know that that's how I watched it.
Right, us too.
Yeah, I wish now I would have gone to the theater because it's so visually and auditorially exciting, that I would have rather had that theater experience to be my first time. But I did watch it at home.
And so here's my thought, and it kind of goes back to what you said about, are people watching this on HBO Max? Kevin Foux and I were discussing going back to the theater.
Mhm.
And we had all these big plans to go back to the theater. And I looked at him and I said, we've got to go for A Quiet Place too. Why? Because if we watch that at home, there are going to be cars passing by, and we have pets and loud neighbors, and it ruins the overall ambiance of the film, right?
Mhm.
Like there's so much of that film that comes from it being quiet. And so I was like, that's what we have to see in the theater. Do I want to see In the Heights in the theater? Sure. But could I watch it at home and still get a good quality experience?
Mhm.
I think so. Now, did we end up going to the theater? No, because I decided to have a baby. And for those of you who don't know Kevin and I, that baby came a little bit early, so we were not totally ready for him to be here quite yet. So that canceled our movie plans. We're okay. That's all right. But I think that when you're making that decision and you're just getting back to going to the theater, people are weighing things like that.
Yeah.
And that's why, at least for me, I would choose to go see A Quiet Place in the theater and watch In the Heights at home.
You see, I'm of two minds about it. I know we're getting so off topic here because we're talking about A Quiet Place now, but oh well. It's our pod. We'll do what we want.
We do what we want.
I'm of two minds about going back to see A Quiet Place because I really loved the theater experience with the first one. I was very lucky in that I had a packed house that was 100% silent the entire time. But here at home, I've got my nice brand new Dolby Atmos headphones with noise canceling that I could just pop on, and I bet I'd have the exact same, if not better, audio experience at home. So I'm a little torn on it.
I mean, I think that's a conversation that can go for a lot of films in the film industry right now.
Right.
I think it's, the conversation we've been having about the streaming versus theater, for a year now or more. So yeah. But I guess getting back to In the Heights. All right. So let's talk about, you guys brought it up earlier, staging a movie versus staging a musical as a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was kind of one of the most interesting things watching it, because they did such a good job of translating this to a film that I was sitting there thinking, okay, if I was in a theater, how in the world would they block these scenes, and would it be as dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess I'll ask you, Kevin, do you know how this play sort of goes when you're watching it?
So it's very similar to Hamilton, whereas Hamilton just really has the one set and then it's kind of open in the middle, and then people just kind of mime the different settings, basically the different scenery. So the set on stage is Usnavi's bodega and kind of the street. And so things like when they're in the club or when they're in people's houses, it's all just there in that open stage. And that's just one of the tenets of going to see theater, is that you just suspend your disbelief and okay, we're fine. Whereas in a movie, obviously you can do that, and it has been done with middling success, I think, before. But where a director of a musical movie really lives or dies in the decisions that they make is in how they block the scenes and how they stage these big numbers. And John Chu, who this was the first movie of his I've seen since, I want to say, one of the Step Up sequels. I know he did Crazy Rich Asians, but I never saw that. He blew me out of the water, man. I thought his decisions and his choices that he made with the camera and with the blocking were phenomenal. Because it really took the essence of all of those numbers and just brought them to life in such beautiful ways. I can't help but think of the 96,000 scene.
Right, exactly.
On stage, they're all just there. They're all just there on the stage, and that's fine. But here for the movie, he transported it to the city pool, and it was such a dynamic setting. With all of the water, you had these wonderful overhead Busby Berkeley shots of the geometrical shapes of people swimming. It was just so dynamic and full of life. It just absolutely blew me away. And the movie was full of choices like that, translating those numbers into just tour de force performances, both visually, audio wise, acting, everything. Honestly, I was just in love with this movie. I absolutely loved this movie.
And then when you talk about, suspending reality, when you watch something live on stage, you kind of take the set at face value.
Mhm.
And I have not seen In the Heights on stage, but I did kind of read up on how they did the adaptation. And what I thought was interesting is that they chose to frame the conversation where Yusnavi is talking to the kids. Originally, you see him like on a beach.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we kind of reveal that he's in his bodega. But what you see on stage, like if you're watching that on stage and you've got that beach scene behind him, you would have to decide in your mind,
Mhm.
Is he at his bodega or do we have him actually on the beach? And I think they did beautiful things with that, considering that I think that is what our mind is supposed to do
Yeah.
anyways with a
Mhm.
stage production.
Yeah. Well, and on stage, he's addressing the audience directly. They added those kids in, and the kind of the bookending scene, specifically for the movie, as just a framing device to tell the story, because they didn't want to, I guess, break the fourth wall too much. He does directly address the audience. Usnavi does in the movie some, but nowhere near as much as in the play. But I think it really worked. I loved the little bookend scene, as you say, and the reveal, the slow reveal that the beach is his bodega all along was just chef kiss, mwah, beautiful.
Yeah.
That was the only part that I would say is a little bit cheese for me, but
Fuck
with-
off.
I know, and I'm going to tell you that the grandma made me cry, so I did love this
You're
movie.
right.
But yeah, I mean, and it's just kind of one of those things, like you guys said earlier, going into this, it's a musical. There's going to be a big layer of cheese slathered on.
Yeah, right.
And so I just want to tell people out there, if you're not a musical fan and you've made it this far in the podcast, kudos to you. But also, just expect a little bit of extravagance when you see movies like this.
Absolutely.
And I think that Lin-Manuel does that very well, and he's also, I think, something I appreciate about him and his characters that he's worked with. He's done a good job of grounding them in reality, and even as ridiculous as Hamilton is, it's still a decent history lesson. And I know it is very, very extravagant. It's very much, a lot of that is not what happened. But I appreciate that it's not just, at least for me anyway, as a casual fan, it's not this extravagant, over the top, blowing everything out to outer space and back.
Right.
A lot of these characters are grounded. It's very approachable to me.
Mm-hmm.
As a non-musical fan, and I really appreciate that about his work. And I think I think going forward he'll be the same way. But I like that I can get into a genre and get immersed in these films, and especially In the Heights, and not having any experience with it, not knowing anything about it, and I'm still coming away from this movie saying, man, this is just a damn fine movie in this genre that I normally don't watch.
Yeah.
And I think that's always fun to kind of broaden your horizons like that. And I encourage anyone listening, like, hey, give musicals a shot. Give this movie in particular. It's streaming right now. If you have HBO Max, give it a shot. I think it is well worth it to check something like this out.
Well, and you mentioned the relatability of his characters in Hamilton, and I think that carries over to this as well, to In the Heights. The struggles that Usnavi and Nina and Vanessa are going through are very grounded, very realistic, and very relatable. Who doesn't want to, save up money and leave the town that they grew up in? It's a very relatable, want that I think a lot of people can latch onto.
Now, I have a question, and I don't know this, Kevin Rice. Are you a Spanish speaker?
Oh, no. I know very little. I took 3 years of high school Spanish. I know enough to be able to understand a few things, but I would not call myself a Spanish speaker at all. No.
Well, and I was just kind of wondering, and it sounds like you loved it anyways, but there were a couple times where they were using a little more Spanish than English, and I would look over at Kevin Foux to see how he was doing with it, because sometimes the captions on the bottom really explained it, and sometimes they didn't. And so with the two of us watching together, and I'm a pretty fluent Spanish speaker, and Kevin is not, I was just curious if that impacted his enjoyment, but it sounds like it didn't for you.
It didn't. No, it didn't for me at all, because, and I think this is one of the great things about telling a story through music, is that you don't necessarily need to understand what's going on. I mean, look at opera.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people have been watching opera who don't necessarily speak Italian or German for hundreds of years because the emotion and the context of the story is still enough to make you understand what's going on. You know, you look at the Carnaval del Barrio scene in this movie, which again, another fantastic scene. A lot of that is in Spanish, and I didn't understand much of it at all, but I still understood the celebratory, you know, vibe that they were going for, and so it still played 100% fine.
Yeah, and my Spanish is so fluent that I like would forget that like the language switched, and then I'd look over and I'm like, oh, Kevin, are you following? Like, is this working for you? Because I know there are some people who would be offended by that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's actually a testament to the film. No, it didn't affect me at all. It was very easy to follow, very, you know, like I said earlier, approachable.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. And like, you know, I'm not saying that, oh, please dumb the movie down for the white man. Like I get that, you know, a lot of creators don't want to do that, but I do appreciate that, you know, it does have that level of approachability. And I do think that, like, you know, let's say like Nick, for example, who's kind of poo-pooed musicals and poo-pooed a couple of these. I would say that, you know, and I know he's going to listen to this later anyway, but I would say like, hey, like, give it a chance. You know, maybe turn on HBO Max one night when you have a free minute and just kind of see if you can get yourself into this story, because I think a lot more people can than they think they can. You know?
I think so too. I mean, honestly, if you can turn on the first 15 minutes, and I think that's enough of a metric to let you know if you're going to enjoy the rest of it or not. If you watch the first musical number and you're like, nope, this isn't for me, then just turn it off, because you're not going to have a good time. But I think just the opening bit is going to draw a lot of people in because it's so well done and so energetic, and yeah, it's just great.
The whole movie really has a ridiculous amount of energy. I'm glad that it, you know, I know that on the stage they would just keep going and going with a small, you know, interlude. I don't know how they do it, but you know, these actors had to have been worked, man.
Yeah,
no, what a workout.
And, you know, it was so well paced and so energetic that I did not feel the 2.5 hours that I was sitting there for. Did you like to? Did you? For me, it did not feel that long.
No, not at all.
It felt a tad bit long for me, but you know, I'm the odd man out. But you know, just a little bit. But I was fine. I was like, oh, this is fine. You know, it's telling a good story.
Yeah.
I do think it dragged at the end a little bit, but it is what it is. Like I totally understand.
Kevin was really invested through Abuela, but once we give spoilers on this podcast, right? Like I can just say, once Abuela died, like I think Kevin was struggling a little.
Yeah. Speaking of that was definitely my favorite part of the film, and her number as well. Now, I don't want to speak Spanish because I'm going to butcher it. Kate, please say the name of her.
Of what? Like her character?
Her song, Paciencia y Fe.
Paciencia y Fe.
Yeah.
So patience and faith.
Yeah.
Right. Patience and faith. It's just an absolutely beautiful
showstopper.
Yeah, a showstopper because it's a story in and of itself, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's this story in song of the grandmother coming to America and her life here and sort of what she's become and where she's come from and where she's going, which is, you know, her end. But what a beautifully self-told story in a song within the film. Just amazing.
It was so good that as soon as it ended, I rewound it and watched it again. because that was just this is the standout moment of the movie. It really is, because you have this actress Olga Merediz, the only transplant from the stage play, by the way. She also originated the character on stage.
Oh, amazing! I did not know that.
And she was nominated for the Tony for that. She didn't win, but she was nominated. She's going to get nominated for an Oscar for this. Mark my words.
As she should.
So what she brought to that song was stunning. It was just stunning. I mean, like, just I'm watching it slack-jawed thinking this is a performance of a lifetime that I'm watching here, because it was so full of raw emotion and anger and struggle and ultimately, you know, hope and perseverance and of not only her but of her entire culture coming to a new land and putting down roots and making it their own. And that number was so just beautifully staged. Again, credit to John Chu, who I was nowhere near on my radar of directors to watch until this movie, because the way he shot and cut this movie, that scene in particular, was just jaw-dropping. It really was.
Now, obviously, the Kevins are in agreement. That's our favorite part of the movie. Kate, I'm curious. Was there another number or another part that you liked, or was the Abuela also your favorite part of the film?
You know, I liked so many parts.
Yeah.
That was maybe not my favorite scene. I loved a lot of the action that happened in the hair and nail salon.
Yeah, I love that.
Right.
I think that there was a lot that happened there that like didn't always translate. There were so many things that were like the spirit of the community, but there were also things they were saying in Spanish that were kind of like, you know, little snide digs at their friends and their neighbors. And I think it was just very realistic. And to me, a location like that, like, yes, the bodega, but we don't see as many people in the bodega. A location like that is the heart of a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I felt like a lot of the story kind of came together for me in those scenes, not only because we had kind of seen things happening for, you know, Nina over here or Yusnavi over here, but you kind of see how it impacts everyone when you bring them together in that scene.
Yeah, those scenes, and then the we've already talked about the pool scene and the Carnival del Barrio scene. The scenes where the community is all together is really, I think, the kind of where the movie really shines, because that's what it's about. It's about community, right? And so seeing all that together was just great.
Absolutely. You know, I think we've covered a lot of things on the film. I guess quickly, I'll bring up a couple of strong points in the cast that I really like. Now, we already talked. What was her name, Abuela?
Olga Meredith.
Yes, Olga, amazing. I mean, obviously, I think she's going to get the Oscar as well. Let's talk about some of the side characters because I didn't really know Jimmy Smits could sing.
No, that was a huge shock to me.
Yeah, he was great in this. Loved him. Loved seeing him.
Yeah, he was absolutely wonderful as the dad. I really enjoyed him. I didn't expect him to ever pop up in a musical, but I'm glad he did.
Yeah, likewise with Corey Hawkins. Corey Hawkins, you might remember, he played Dr. Dre in Straight Outta Compton.
He was amazing. Fantastic. He was one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, fantastic. Of course, Anthony Ramos. I mean, the dude's about to break out in a huge way. Just on the cusp of superstardom. He's got blockbuster after blockbuster lined up now. But he was you remember him from Hamilton. He was John Lawrence in Hamilton.
I did not know that. Oh man, I didn't connect that at all. That's great. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, very, very strong cast. Very character driven. I mean, beautiful film. I think it's a winner all around here on the podcast. Were there maybe you guys are sort of musical buffs? I'll start with you, Kate. Was there anything that you didn't like about the
movie? I wish I wasn't first. There were moments where I agree it started to drag a little, and then I felt like similar to what you said, Kevin. Like it started really strong, and then we got through like the whole like lottery thing, and then I kind of felt like as we closed, it wasn't as strong. And when you look at something like, and I know he wrote it later, but like Hamilton kind of has like, you know, a little bit of a lull after Hamilton dies, but that ending song is so beautiful and strong. And I just kind of felt like we didn't go out as strong as we could have.
I think, well, for me, the denouement drags a bit. It really does. And that's just because I think a lot of it is because they cut out a few musical numbers from the second act to trunk it. First of all, to make it where it's not a 3.5 hour movie. But I think that led to some storylines getting a bit of short shrift because of it, like Nina and Benny's romance. The whole first half of the movie is kind of building up to something, and then you're just kind of told, oh, they already made love off screen.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, clearly there's something that's been cut out here.
I didn't know about the cuts. That actually is cool to know, and that's actually good information because I wasn't really aware how much was cut and where it was cut. I mean, obviously, Nina and Benny kind of just disappear for a little while, but it makes sense though. I imagine that this show is fairly long.
There were a lot of other changes as well to the script, which I think ended up really being good. Like in the play, you find out that Abuela won the lottery before she dies. In fact, I think that there's lines about it, her singing lines about it in her big number. What am I going to do with all this money? So I like that change in the movie to where you don't find out that she won until the very end.
Yes,
I,
me
I
too.
think that was a good change. Another change was that Nina's mother is alive in the play, but here in the movie they killed her off screen. She was dead. That was a change. I think that it worked, but I do kind of wonder if it was the right choice because I don't know. I don't know because it's a good character. It has a couple of good moments in the play as well that we miss here in the movie. So I don't know.
All right, guys. Well, I think we can start wrapping it up. Lin-Manuel's meteoric rise and In the Heights we've kind of covered today, but I guess the obviously we've praised the movie. It's a winner all around from all of us. Not very many negative things to say. Kevin, just ending the show here. Is there anything else you want to say about Lin-Manuel, musicals in general, In the Heights?
I just hope if you're listening to this and you're not a fan of the genre, I probably I'm just going to go ahead and guess it's because you haven't given it a fair shot. Because I think if you really go into watching a musical, just open-minded with the full understanding that I'm about to watch something that's just on the surface a little bit nuts, that I think there's a lot to love because it's like I said earlier, it's just the perfect amalgamation of basically every form of creativity we have. And so I just really hope that people, give the genre a shot. And this movie in particular is a fantastic example of it. So yeah, give it a watch. It's great.
All right, Kate, any final words about what we discussed or just anything random you want to say?
I can just say whatever I want. This is great. Like my own little podcast. I also want to say that, I think that again, sometimes we get caught up in, this is a story about the Latinx community, and I'm not Latinx, and so I'm not going to understand or I'm not going to relate. And I just think that if that's your opinion, then I think you should give it a try. Maybe it won't change your mind, but I think there was so much relatable in this. And I am not a Latinx person. I know Spanish. That doesn't mean that I'm Latino or understand people's culture or the way they grew up. But I grew up, like I said, outside of Chicago. And my husband, Kevin, can tell you that every time the power goes out, I panic. Tears in my eyes, panic. And we were pretty early in our dating, and he was like, it's just the power. And I was like, no, people die when the power goes out. Mm-hmm. And he was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And in bigger cities, especially places like New York or Chicago, they're built to keep the heat in because they're cold cities. Mm-hmm. And people who don't have a lot of resources or money sometimes live on the 80th or 90th floor of a building. Yeah. And someone like an abuela who maybe cannot walk down 60 flights of stairs, who's used to the elevator, can really become trapped. Yeah. And so I remember growing up and the power going out for 5-6 days at a time. And, all you would hear is go check on your neighbors. Yeah. Go check on your neighbors, go check on the elderly, take care of people. And that's all about community. And I think that watching this, especially because there's a huge power outage, that's a big part of the movie, it made me think of my own community and where I grew up and just some of the themes, that we've got going on here. My grandfather was a first-generation immigrant, not from a Latin country. Definitely a lot more privilege in his position coming from Europe, but it still didn't, his life wasn't easy and his kids' lives weren't easy. And so watching Nina, talk about all the stress of trying to be that person for her mm-hmm. family and her community who goes and leaves and does something more. I know that my generation and my family, really, there was that push to do something more and go to college and be all you can be because the generations in front of us didn't have that option. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's a lot that can be very relatable, whether you're Latinx or not. And so I think give it a chance, step outside your comfort zone, because there's a lot of beautiful story here.
And to kind of just piggyback onto that, it's a movie like this and a comment like what you just said is that why representation is so important in the arts. It's because it allows people to just experience cultures and communities that they otherwise would not have access to. And it just opens your mind to all sorts of new things that you should embrace. So there you go.
Exactly. Well said, guys. Well said. I absolutely agree. Yeah, wonderful closing comments there. And Kate, I want to thank you for walking across the house and sitting in the office and
My
joining
wife.
the podcast.
I
Appreciate
will
it.
say that is more of a challenge now that I recently had your child than it was a few months ago.
Thank you for the long walk. But yes, we are the Lords of the Screen podcast. We try to do a weekly episode. We talk about what's going on in the film industry, film news, movies, films like In the Heights, like we talked about today. So join us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Facebook. We got a Facebook page. We're on Twitter. So hit us up. Let us know if you liked the episode, what you thought. Maybe you'll give In the Heights a try. Maybe you won't. But we will catch you next time. And thanks for listening, everyone.